We don't learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on experience. You need to challenge people to a high degree and then also provide the support of building a relationship and looking at the human first and the performer second. Performance is executing skills and solving problems while under pressure. I think some people in the field of mental performance sometimes think there's a secret sauce and they get really protective of their business. And the reality is, I think we're all better when we share ideas. That's ultimately going to serve our clients better.
Hello and welcome to the Evolving Potential Podcast. This is episode number 29. Today I have on the show Mark Cheney. Mark is a certified mental performance coach, also known as a CMPC, with 2 master's degrees, both in educational leadership as well as performance psychology. Mark also has an undergrad in biochemistry. He has coached 13 state championship teams. Mark has worked with athletes in nearly every sport, as well as business leadership and even AP classes. After years of college golf and basketball, at some point he ended up at the Hogwarts for Athletes, the IMG Academy in Florida. He's since built mental performance programs for schools, been a physics and chemistry instructor, and now the director of mental performance and a coach at Faith Lutheran in Las Vegas, as well as a business owner of Mark Cheney Mental Conditioning. In addition, Mark is a published author, speaker, podcast host, and the organizer of the upcoming Las Vegas Mental Performance Summit next month. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Todd.
All right. So tell me first about this Mental Performance Summit. I mean, you got to be excited about it. I know that's a ton of work you're doing. You just kind of described to me off camera, being busy all day, kind of working from 7 to 3, training people from 4 to 5, athletes, that is, from the school, then moving into private practice. And now you're running some, event by yourself.
Yes.
I mean, that's a lot of work. So tell me about that.
So you mentioned the time I spent at IMG, and pre-COVID, IMG used to host a think tank, and it was really just friends of IMG and people who'd spent time on campus there as well that we'd get together and talk shop and share ideas. And so that was in the back of my head. Another event I used to go to was in La Jolla, again, pre-COVID. And so both those events kind of disappeared after COVID. And in Vegas, my initial goal was just to get together the people that are in the space of mental performance. And it turns out there weren't many of us, really, a couple of clinical folks. I was the first CMPC in the Valley. But I just wanted to get people together to talk shop, share ideas, and see if we could level things up. And then that was 2 years ago. And last year, Dr. Jim Taylor approached me about being a keynote. And so we brought him in. And then the feedback I got from my attendees was, we need more of this. Can we go a second day? Can we add to it? So I said, all right, let's see what we can do. And so I called some friends and included some of my local contacts, and then it's turned into a super exciting lineup. I mean, I don't care if anyone shows up. If just the group of speakers get to hang out, we're going to have a great time.
That is awesome. That is awesome. What would you hope that if people do come, naturally, obviously, there's some sort of take home, is the and let me ask first, I guess, is the crowd kind of mental performance coaches you hope to have, or would you hope to have more of the common people learning mental performance?
Yeah, we want basically a cross section of performance. So certainly the mental performance folks, mental health folks, we want them there too, because there's a seat for all of us at that table. Definitely want coaches who are looking to level up both their team's performance, but then also just their own performance. And then I've had some grad students who are interested in building those connections and network in the field. So those people, and then, if there's somebody that is just really curious about what does this look like for me? What does this look like for my team? we're all about learning. And so if people want to learn and listen and share ideas at the same time, then they're certainly welcome to come. So yeah, I do hope people show up, and we've got a number of people that those registrations are starting to trickle in, but um, it's really my goal is to sit there and learn and provide an avenue and a means for us to share ideas, because I think some people in the field of mental performance sometimes think there's a secret sauce, and they
Mhm.
get really protective of their business, and the reality is I think we're all better when we share ideas, and that's ultimately going to serve our clients better, and so let's not protect that. Let's share that so we can help as many people as possible.
I love that you said that because honestly, that's what really started this podcast. Was I was a little bit uncertain which path I wanted to take, like private practice, kind of do my own thing, or work for some sports teams, or whatever I wanted to do. And so I started reaching out to people doing it, and I was actually shocked how many were just willing to just talk shop because they're like, "Oh my gosh, you want to talk about mental performance?
Right.
Absolutely!" And I'm like, "No way!" Like some bigger names and things I didn't expect to say yes to me, and I'm like, this is awesome. And I'm like, what if I record these? Like, this would be amazing because then I can give value to more people from the conversation that we've had as well. So like, yeah, I'm right there in the same boat. I think that you bring people together and you put good ideas together, and everybody wins in the long run.
Exactly.
I love that. So, okay. So I want to go into an epiphany that you had that got you into mental performance coaching. How do you get into this line of work in the first place?
I would say I stumbled into it. It was certainly not something I was pursuing or seeking. It was a bit of a winding path to get there. Uh, if I had to target the genesis, I would have to say the 2009 girls state tournament for golf in Nevada. So my high school team wins the region tournament. We set a state record for low score. I have a bunch of freshmen, really good players, and we go to the state tournament. We play our worst round of the year at the state tournament, day one.
Oh, what?
So we go from state record to our worst round of the year, and I gathered the girls together afterwards and said, okay, we played as bad as we possibly could. Now we've seen the course. We know what to expect. We know what it's going to feel like. Tomorrow's going to be a better day. Because we still had the lead. We had a one-stroke lead.
No way.
And so we come back the next day, and I'm feeling better about it. And right from the start, I could see that this was not going to go well. And it's like watching a train wreck in slow motion. I could see the implosion happening. I could see the frustration. I could see the disappointment with the shots and how things were going and the tension. And I said all the things that I knew as a coach at that time, but I couldn't pull them out of it. So we finished second, which, all things considered is a good finish for any high school team. But I certainly felt like that was one we let get away.
Yeah, what
And
happened? Yeah.
so, golf it is inherently mental. And I think more mental game books about golf have been written than any other sport. So I start reading those and find my way into Golf Psych, which was a program started by John Stabler and Deborah Graham, who researched what's I guess you could say the mental makeup of championship golfers. So she had done her PhD research on performers and identified 8 character traits that aligned with people who win consistently on tour. So not just the 1 or 2 times, but people who are winning majors, who are winning season after season. And so got to go to that certification and learn more about the golf side of things. And then I was just reading elsewhere, just in terms of trying to help my coaching and help my students be better academically. I'm talking through a variety of things with a friend. He said, "Oh, you're talking about sports psychology. You should go back to school." I said, "Oh, okay." So now I have a name for what this is. I'm just interested in performance and helping people be better. But now I've got a name for it, and he said you should go back to school. And around that same time, I went to a summit at IMG, and this somehow ran across my desk that there was a coaching workshop that was put on by their mental performance staff. So I talked to my AD. He funded the weekend trip. I fly down there. It's the first time I've seen IMG. Like I said, it's Hogwarts. It's Disneyland for athletes. And in that process, met one of the staff that told me about her grad program. I'm like, oh, okay, that's a program I haven't heard of. Let me go check that out. And 6 months later, I was in the grad program, and concurrently with that, I see an application for a summer position IMG. So I'm literally 2.5 classes into my grad program, and I said, well, I've been there. That place is cool. I'm going to apply. And so I turned the application in, was fortunate to get selected to go down there. So I'm working on my master's. I'm spending all day in the mental conditioning offices right next to the tennis courts, watching top 10 players in the world practice, learning from some of the best mental performance people in the field, all with super diverse backgrounds and approaches, and just absorbing it like a sponge. And that's really how it got going. Concurrently, I talked my school into helping pay for my master's. So they wanted something out of it, and they said, let's offer a class. So I offered a sports psych class, and I get 75 kids to sign up for it right away.
Jeez.
And so I literally leave IMG on a Saturday. This is 2014, and I'm back in teacher meetings on a Monday, and I'm getting ready to start this class. But then I'm looking at academics with a totally different lens too, and so I've taught the sports psych class now for a dozen years, and then along the way, then the school started to see more value. The athletic director was on board. He helped create a position, so I get a little more payment out of my time that I spend with those athletes, and then it's just incrementally grown and spread from there.
Jeez. So now I'd like to connect the dots between the golf psych program and the consistency in which you probably saw at IMG Academy, and what we're seeing now in like Kurt Signetti and Mike McDonald, because I wanted to talk to you about that. And so, like,
Right.
what does it take to build a championship culture / what does it take to consistently, be a champion?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a number of things to tie together. So, I think let's start with the culture idea. The NFL has nine vacant positions that are being filled or have been filled, and so every one of them is going to talk about culture. A college coach gets hired, they're talking about culture. So I think a lot of people talk about culture, or we're going to create a culture, and the reality is every team, every organization has a culture. The question is, did you intentionally design that or not? Just by default. So there are, lots of people who've written on culture, I think, that are good reads. One I like is Jeff Jansen's work, where he identified, I think, 8 different varieties of culture. But ultimately, I think there's if you put it more in a quadrant system of the level of challenge and the level of support, then I think that's a good starting place for culture. So are we going to have a high challenge environment but not be very supportive? Well, there are teams, especially professional organizations, that run that way, but that can get really cutthroat. Probably more on the high school or the youth sports side, you're going to see groups that are really high support, and the kids have a great time, but they're maybe not very demanding. And so the results don't necessarily show up on the field or on the courts. I think you need both. You need to challenge people to a high degree, and then also provide the support of relationship, of building a relationship, and looking at the human first and the performer second. And I get it. Professional sport is about winning. It's about outcome. But I think when you look at those various organizations, those groups that have placed a higher priority on the human connection have had sustained success for longer periods of time, as opposed to somebody that might win one championship, but then it doesn't last because it doesn't have the strength behind it. So that's a structure, I guess, I like to think about is that challenge and support. But then that's going to look different for different people, different personalities, and different paths are going to lead to those different approaches. So, Kurt Signetti's path is very different than Mike McDonald's path, and I think that shows up in how they coach and how they approach things. But at the same time, they've got the intentionality behind it. So, like one of the analogies, I like to use analogies and metaphors when I work with people and when I teach, and so I think culture is a lot like gardening. I mean, the first thing, if you're going to plant a garden, you have to go to the nursery and pick out the seeds. Like, I want to grow carrots, or I want to grow broccoli, or I want to grow tomatoes, or you either pick the seeds or you pick the seedlings first, and then you have to plant, and you need some fertile soil, and you need to irrigate that and fertilize that and grow and get those seedlings to take root, or the seeds to sprout. That has to happen first. So you got to know what you want to grow first. If you don't, then you're just like hoping something sprouts out of the ground, and it might be good, and it might not be. I find a lot of teams just kind of hope that their culture is good, and oh, we have a great class of seniors this year, so our culture is good, or oh, we don't have strong leadership this year, so the culture is not very good. And they're just hoping it depends on the player. So I think you've got to identify really clearly what you want that culture to be, and then plant, and then you've got to water it. And with any garden, you're going to have weeds. So you need to pull some weeds and get those things out. And then as those plants grow and become stronger, more established, then you've got to have some added level of support. You don't just let the plant grow wild. You're going to prune, and you're going to remove branches, so that you get better airflow, you get better production of fruit. And so in the same way, as that culture is growing, you've got to clip some things back. You've got to make sure you're shaping it the way you want to. It might be growing, but let's make sure it's growing in the right direction, the right shape. And if you do all those things, then eventually you get that harvest, and you build, you've grown something that's going to be strong and enduring. And so that's the way I like to think about culture, of cultivating that for growth, and thinking about what your crop, if you will, is going to be at the end.
That's honestly one of the most like complex and like big answers, while still being like so simple and perfect. Like, it's like you're like, I can't really answer that question, but let me give you my 4 bullet points. Like, it's like you had a very good answer for that. So it's like the challenges support. So it's like it's very nuanced, is what you're kind of saying. It's like, but understanding the balance between challenge and support is going to be entirely different with every different room that you're in, every different athlete you're dealing with. To be paying attention to that, to be connecting with different humans, to be intentional, to be really doing all of those different things that kind of involve in that gardening process. Like that was an amazing answer, by the way. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And if we were going to zoom down now and go into an individual, I heard you talk about something, the big 4 that you use, the things that are in our control. I would love to hear you talk about that.
Well, let me ask. Would you say big 4, like big 4 parts of culture, or are we talking mental skills?
No, the individual level. So like the breathing and things that we can control personally,
Sure.
on individual level.
Yeah. When I first learned about this, the name Big 4, I think, comes from the Navy SEALs. And when they talked about that, that's, your goal setting, your self-talk, your energy management or physiology management with your breathing, and then mentally rehearsing that. I actually like to go, I call it Big 4+1, because I like to add in reflection. So let's say I'm working with a team or an individual. I like to think in terms of let's prime for performance, and let's prime ourselves for practice, and let's prime for games. And so I think using the Big Four is your priming process. So I work with a lot of high school kids. Their typical approach to practice is I get out of class, I check my phone, I talk to my girlfriend, I look at the time. Oh, I don't want to be late, don't want to be the last one on the court of the field, so I'm going to run over, throw my stuff in the locker room, throw my gear on, get on the court. Okay, what are we doing today, coach? And if we're honest, because one of my college teams I've worked with, that kind of the same thing is happening. So I think we've got to be better at preparing for that. So let's finish the day and then get present to what we're about to do. So we've got to leave the day behind. I say you got to take the backpack off. So the backpack's your day. Take that off, set it aside. We've got to get present, and using the breath is I think the best way to do that. And so it doesn't take long. Just take a minute to really get where your feet are and focused on what you're about to do. So we're going to get present. We're going to think about what's our goal for practice. Like, what are we trying to do? Why are we here today? And I think a lot of athletes show up without really knowing that. They let the coach set the purpose for the day, or it's Tuesday, I go to practice. It's what we do. And so let's have an intention for practice. I'm going to get better at this skill, or we're going to get better on offense, or we're going to make improvements in this tactical approach, or whatever it is. Let's have an intention behind what we're about to do, and then spend some time visualizing the execution of that goal. So again, that doesn't have to take a lot of time, but let's mentally rehearse what we're about to do, and then have a plan for how we're going to talk to ourselves through it. Do we have specific instructional cues we're going to use that are maybe on the technical or tactical side, or is it more on the motivational side? I need to get through this conditioning drill, or this thing I don't really like, but I know I need to get better at. So how am I going to talk to myself? So I think if athletes do those four things, they're going to be far more successful in practice, and likewise in games. And then post-practice, then the reflection piece is vital. I asked a group of students this recently, what do you do after practice? And they're like, check my phone, shower, go eat. Like, okay, so let's not just leave practice, because the purpose of practice is to learn. Let's think about what happened there. So what did I do well? What could I have done better? How am I going to be better at that tomorrow? And now we get a cyclical effect, because that can drive the goal for the next day. And then we've also got to think, well, what was fun? What did I learn? Like, those things should be happening too. If they walked out of practice and didn't learn something about the game or themselves, or left a game and it wasn't fun, then we need to figure that out too. So then that reflection becomes really important to learn from it. One of the ideas I like is, this comes from John Dewey, is we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. And I think that's really true. I'll go draw on my golf background. I've seen people that have been on the driving range for 40 years. They have lots of experience, and they're terrible because they've never learned anything. They just keep repeating the same thing, hoping that they're going to get a different result. And so rather than coming with a purpose for that practice session, learning something in that practice session, reflecting on what they need to do, and then setting a plan to change it the next day. So I think that reflection piece has to be part of the process.
How do you get to the point of feeling confident enough to create curriculum and just speak so freely? Like, what, I can just only imagine the first time you went through, like, I'm creating the curriculum for this whole school. Like, talk me through that a little bit.
Well, I am a teacher, so it kind of comes with the territory. So I had that background. When I started the sports psych class, I think I've been teaching for 14 or 15 years. So some of that comes with just the idea of lesson planning, of thinking through things. And then all teachers are master thieves. We beg, borrow, and steal, and then we adapt. So what what I could get my hands on from IMG in terms of the curriculum that they use there certainly helped me. We essentially had 2 weeks of curriculum that we would repeat through the course of the summer. So I had, that's 10 lessons. Now in an average school year, I have 85 lessons. So that first year, you're just staying one day ahead of the kids. And so I definitely had a framework of what I believe developmental performance, the direction and a progression of core ideas. And then you flesh it out. You research and you dive, and that first year especially, it was, literally, let's just stay one day ahead and plan things out, and let's try these ideas and research and find additional activities and video examples and games, and let's plug that in and see how that responds. And then you edit, and sometimes you edit between classes. Well, the first block didn't go so well, so let's try this second block, and we're going to scrap this, or the best case scenario on those days was when I was overplanned. And that's advice I give to anyone who's planning a group session. Plan more than you think you have time for, because sometimes you might have to use all that, and you don't want dead air.
Yeah, not have it.
And be finished up. And then if you're overplanned, now you've got a head start on the next day. So that's really how it went. And then, yeah, it was just the experience of teaching it and then fleshing out ideas. And then I like to read and find different sources. And I find resources and activities in random places. I don't anymore, but for a long time, I still had a physical newspaper every morning. And so I'd pull great stuff out of the newspaper, things like that, or things that people would post on social media, or that would spark an interest. And then I'd go learn a little more. And then I just cobbled it together from a variety of things. But having the framework, I think, is really the important part of thinking, what's your progression? What leads to what leads to what? And, in academic terms, it's your theoretical framework. That's not language I typically like to use, but if you have that understanding, then you build around it.
And what stories come to mind as far as you seeing that this is now working? Like you've implemented it. I'm sure, I can only imagine, these are high school kids. Like when it works, it probably somewhat noticeable.
Yeah, I mean, there's the temptation, I think, to anyone that's in the business of, we won a championship, and it's because of what I did. And I think that's a dangerous place to be. I think we play a really small part in the success of teams. And actually, one of my speakers at the summit said this a couple of years ago. Like, if you're willing to take credit for the wins, you better be there when it doesn't go so well either, and understand that, and you better be around for the losses too. So I think the best metric for that, because this is always the question I get, well, how do you measure your impact?
Yeah.
And it's not like your 40 time or your bench press that we can see that number improved. So for me, it's always when somebody says, this worked, like I did something that I couldn't do before, or we handled this situation in a different way, and we got over the hump. When somebody's parents say to me, we can see the difference in how they're reacting and responding on the field, and they're having more fun and they're enjoying it. So I'm not going to argue with mom or dad,
Yep.
or I'm not going to argue with the coach when they say this was helpful and this made a difference for us. One thing that I always like to listen to as well is, do I hear the language being used by coaches or by athletes? So if they're stating it without any prompting from me, it's become part of their vernacular, then you know that they bought in, and now it gets really impactful. So I'll give you one example. I was working with our cross country team this fall, and so there's an idea that I was using with them about the pain cave, which is an idea that comes from Courtney Dahlwalter, who's a ultra marathon champion. And so we had talked about the idea of the pain cave. Well, a couple of weeks later, they saw me out on the track just running for myself. And so they're cheering me on of, embrace the pain cave, enter the pain cave. And they're just repeating the same things that I had said to them in our session. So I knew they had absorbed it, and I knew they had taken that to heart. So those are the kinds of things that I think are more gratifying even than seeing a team win. But they did win state too, so there was that payoff as well.
No, it sounds incredibly rewarding to work with the schools, and so that makes me wonder if, a personal, maybe entrepreneurial perspective, is that an environment that you see yourself staying in forever, or are you trying to transition into private practice? I can only imagine that could be so difficult because you have to leave that behind. I don't know. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, I mean, you're not the first person, or probably not the last, to ask me that question, because let's even step outside the sport aspect of it. When I got in this field, I was not thinking about academic implications at all. I just wanted my teams to play better. And then when I came back and I'm sitting in teacher meetings, all of a sudden I'm just looking at the conversations in it through a different set of lenses. I mean, well, why doesn't Johnny do his homework? Well, that's because it's a motivation issue, or maybe it's a mindset issue of Johnny doesn't believe he's capable of doing his homework, so therefore why even try? Or maybe it's a matter of resilience, or how do they talk to them? So all of a sudden I had a different language to talk about some of the academic implications of or academic performances I was seeing from students. And so over time, then I started embedding sports psych into my chemistry class, and talking to other people on campus about how mental performance could be useful, not just for the athletic department. So I'm biased. I think every school should have a mental performance coach. We're not really talking sports psychology. It's really just life psychology, because every day is performance. So why not equip everybody, not just our athletes, with the skills to be successful in the moments that matter the most? So I think there's such opportunity in an academic environment to do those things. I'm also, interested in spending as much time as I can on mental performance, and so it's something I explore from time to time, of thinking, well, what would this look like to go solely in private practice? So it's not that I've never considered that. I definitely think about it. I do enjoy the long-term relationship with coaches, and building program expectations. So there are teams now that just know this is what we do. So it is now become normalized to work on their mental game. It's Mental Monday. We know we're meeting with Mark. Like, it's not even a conversation. And the upperclassmen can tell the underclassmen what we're doing in those times. And so in the same way, we have very experienced coaching staff. And so the opportunity to have those long-term conversations and do some deeper dives on coaching development, that's interesting to me as well. So, when when I was at IMG, Justin Sewell was one of my supervisors,
Yep,
and
familiar
yeah, and he would, yeah, one of the
with him.
best known names in the field, and he said, people would ask me, "What's your 5-year plan?" He said, "I don't have a 5-year plan. I just stay open to possibilities and willing to listen and explore." And I think that's kind of where I am. The eyes will stay open to possibility and see where I may be called to do work. But right now, that's Las Vegas, and so we'll see what
I
happens
love
next.
I love that, and I'm really glad you brought up the academic implications. Not necessarily because that interests me per se, but it's just the fact that hold on, you're breaking up. Okay, oh, it's just the fact that these implications go across everything. So that's where it gets a little tricky when you get into the entrepreneurial space, from my own opinion, where it's like, okay, life coaching, because you said it's not sports psychology really, it's life psychology.
Yeah,
So in reality, it's like people are like, oh, is it life coaching or is it like mental toughness or like what is mental
motivational
performance?
speaking.
Yeah,
Are
it's
you
very
a
confusing. So like
guru?
I know I love mental performance and I feel like it's the closest thing because it's not, because sports psychology insinuates the psychologist, insinuates generally the PhD experience, licensure, all those things, at least in my mind. And so saying mental performance leaves it a little bit more open ended, And so for me, it's like, but at the same time, trying to explain, oh, it's mental performance, and I get a lot of different answers all over the place with what they believe that is. And so it's been an
Yeah.
interesting conversation to have with coaches of like, how do you even explain mental performance? Because I'm sure you have to have that conversation regularly. I'd love to hear your
Oh,
words.
I mean, that that's a whole can of worms in itself because the field kind of struggles with what do we call ourselves, and uh, we can't, like as you correctly said, we can't call ourselves a psychologist because that's a clinical designation, requires licensure, and so sometimes people will call me the psychologist, and I'm like, well, I'm not a psychologist. Here's why. So there is a certain level of education to it, um, but and different people have different opinions. Some people want to go with I'm the mental toughness trainer or the mental skills coach, or some people don't want to use mental at all because they feel there's some stigma there. When I was at ASP back in Montreal in the fall, one of the keynotes mentioned she'd done an analysis of the different titles people were using, and I think there were over 200 different titles that people have come up with. So
Gosh.
I do think it's important to narrow things down. So I like to talk about what's performance. Let's start there. So, performance is executing skills and solving problems while under pressure. And if you keep that definition, well, that's certainly sport, but that could be the arts. That could be your MCAT or ACT or LSAT or any kind of standardized test where you have to perform. It could be an audition for a play, it could be a job interview, could be asking somebody out on a date. Those are all performances. And as humans, we all tend to feel the same thing in moments that matter to us. And whether there's consequence or evaluation or others that hold some level of consequence to it. So since it's all performance, then let's call it that. And now we're going to break that down, and we're working on the mental skills that help you be your best in those moments. Just as your strength and conditioning coach is helping you with the physical skills and your sport coach is helping you with the technical skills. We're just building the skills necessary to help you perform at your best.
That was perfect. You nailed it. You've had some practice doing that. Thank you for doing that.
I've spent a lot of time thinking about it.
So for me, one of the things I noticed was like how generally, at least because I've actually talked to a few NFL athletes and things like that as well, and the amount of exposure, the amount of experience they have around a sports psychologist is more so like they very rarely hear from the sports psychologist. It's kind of more like a go see it when you need it. And so it's a more of a reactive versus a proactive. And I really love, that's why I kind of gravitate towards mental performance, was like how cool it is to teach someone the skills that they need before these crazy
Right.
issues come up. rather than like, oh, okay, well, now here's what happened. Let's talk it out, and here's what you're dealing with, and like diagnosing and talking about the past rather
Yep.
than knowing how to be present.
Yeah, I call that, it's the difference between being a mason and a mechanic. A mason's going to lay a foundation that you can build on. And that's certainly the way I prefer to work. Let's work preseason. Let's build capacity so that now when you're building that structure, you have something solid to rely on. But a lot of people still view the field solely from a fix-it mentality. Let's call the mechanic. Something broke. Now we've got to fix it, which only gets you back to status quo ante. It doesn't move you forwards. It just gets you back to where you were. And there's certainly place for that too. Inevitably in the course of a season, something's going to arise that was unexpected or a new challenge, and we may need to work on that. And so I think it's easier though to do some of that work if you've got the foundation laid in the first place. So I think there's space for both. And I think people are slowly starting to look at this more and more from a strengths perspective as opposed to a treatment perspective.
Like actually kind of putting into practice and understanding that they can improve it.
Right.
Yeah, that's huge, and that's what I kind of started noticing. I got into this line about 5 years ago, maybe 6 now. Got into Trevor Moad, kind of got me and down this path, and yeah, I just like realized how consistent that these principles come up through every single thing, and I just wanted to figure out a way to make them a part of my life and every single thing that I did. And so I'm curious, like just knowing that you've learned so much from a coaching perspective and that there are coaches all over the country who have not come up this route, who have come up with the technical expertise, maybe some, but not necessarily having any sort of understanding of like how we self-sabotage and things like that. So what is something that you wish every coach around the country just kind of understood?
I think with all coaches, I would hope they would intentionally and deeply consider why they do everything they do. From practice design, drill selection, offensive and defensive strategy, player relationship. Like what's the why behind that? And even what's the overarching purpose behind the, even deeper asking the why. Well, why do you coach? Like, what is your purpose in that? I think there are two pieces there, because the why of what you're coaching, are you just solely coaching to win games, or sometimes to advance your career, to gain notoriety, to get a bigger contract? I mean, that becomes very transactional. And so I'm of the opinion that the coaching should be transformational instead. And so let's think about what's the why we're here. And then what's the why of every drill or every activity, every part of our program. And the reason I say that is, in this country, so many coaches' sole education in coaching is their experience as a player. And I call it waterfall coaching, because they coach the way they were coached. And you'll see this in how a coach will react to a mistake or a bad play or a bad call or something. They'll start saying the exact same thing that their coach probably said when they were playing 20, 30 years ago. They'll use the same drills that they learned 20, 30 years ago. And they might even run the same offense or the same skill 20, 30 years ago, because if they haven't really had much education, then they're going to use what they know. And what they know is what they've experienced. And I can't think of another profession that's using 20 or 30-year-old approaches without really considering it. So I don't think the American sport world does a great job of educating coaches. I think it's much better in Europe. I think Australia probably does it better as well, where there's more intentional path to coaching. Like here, lots of people, well, you played, you could be a coach. Or in youth sport, you didn't have to play. If you're just willing to coach,
Yeah.
then you do it. So I think the considering the why, what you're trying to accomplish in the bigger picture, the grand scheme of things, and then also on a more granular level of why am I doing each of these things, just examining that. I would love to have that conversation with every coach I work with.
Then on that note, if you would mind, why would you say that you continue to do this?
So my why of mental performance or my why of coaching? I mean, they're closely linked, but
sure. How about both?
Okay. So when I think about this, I'm definitely looking at it from a transformational side of things. You know, my purpose is to help people get better at what they love to do so they can thrive in the moments that matter. That's my goal. Now, there's an underlying piece to that too. You mentioned my bio. I teach at Faith Lutheran, so we're a Christian institution. And so in that, we're also trying to not just coach for excellence, but coach for eternity. So there's also a faith development side of things that's really important to me. So when people do things with excellence, it provides them with the credibility to influence other people. And now you're providing an opportunity to talk about your faith. And for us, that's our faith in what Jesus Christ has done for us. And so that's the undergirding and overarching purpose behind all that I do.
I very much appreciate you sharing that. And I'm curious, I know you do some public speaking. And so what would be, 2 or 3 topics that you kind of speak on, or if you'd mind just speaking a little bit on one of those topics so I'm familiar with, what's familiar in your mind that you always speak on?
So, I mean, one of the things I'll do are parent talks is just helping. And the way I like to frame it is helping your kids be more successful. Because I will come into a room and I say, you want the same thing that the coach wants, which is the same thing I want, which is for your kid to be successful. Now, we've got to make sure we define what success is and make sure that we're all doing things that all are supporting the success of your athlete. So coaches like it because I can say the things to parents that they would like to say, but the parents are much more receptive when it comes from me as opposed to coming from the coach. So parent talks would be a big one of how do you help your kid be more successful? And that can range from things, what do you say before a game? What do you say during a game? What do you say in the car ride home after the game? What do you view your role in their athletic performance? What's their goal? What's your goal? So having those conversations with parents, because just like we don't do a great job of training coaches in this country, there's no manual for how to be a sports parent either. And so they just kind of look around and they see, well, Tiger Woods' dad did this, so I must do the same thing. Or Johnny down the street got a scholarship, so we need to be exactly like them. And they've got to come up with their own method, their plan for that. So that would be one that I really like, because I think parents are really hungry for that information. And,
does someone put that together, if you don't mind me asking? Like, is there like a place where all the parents come together, or is that more like a one-on-one type of thing?
I mean,
and
that would
how's that work?
that would depend on an organization. So, I worked with a dance studio a couple of years ago, and so we offered a couple of evening talk. Their kids are at dance class, and
Nice.
I had an hour with the parents, or it could be in a preseason meeting with the coach, or just workshops. It's something that we're further exploring how to do on campus too. Of how do we help our parents be better, because some,
Yeah, it's
sometimes
huge.
parents make the sport experience less than enjoyable for their kids. And at the end of the day, you want kids to still love their parents, parents to still love the kid, and then still love the sport, even if they're only going to play in middle school or high school. But you want that to continue. So I think that's one that I enjoy. Uh, Something else is going back to the big 4+1. I just call that mental performance 101. I'm going to do that for our faculty in a couple of weeks, actually, but I've done it at teachers' conferences. Uh, I've talked growth mindset with, at a football coaches conference, education conferences. I've talked about how to, I just call it a performance blueprint that integrates the mental performance into academic performance. But then I've created a model around that as well that I've been trying to share with schools. That I kind of stumbled into that one too. That we could certainly talk more about that blueprint if we have time. But that's another one that I'll talk to educators and coaches about.
I definitely want to come back to that in a second. So I thought it was really cool that you're doing the parent thing, because I've talked to, this is my 29th episode. So, and before that, I'd probably had at least 10 or 15 of these conversations before I was smart enough to record them. But I've talked to only one coach who works with this relationship between parents and kids. Who actually like kind of, it's just interesting. I haven't heard anybody else do it, but he kind of has a relationship between where he is doing a session with the kid and a session with the parent. And so he's like going through and kind of figuring out what the kid's saying, figuring out what the parents saying, and acting as like a middleman between
Yeah.
them. And it's very interesting because like another one of my clients is now a mental performance coach in Belgium. And he talked about how like that's what got him into it, was the ride home. Like he used to get these rides home that like if he lost, like it was silence, it was like negative energy, it was like he just dreaded that. And so he would found himself more often thinking about that during the game. If you like start to lose, you're like, oh no, and you have this huge association with like what the energy is going to be like now. And so that's something I heard you talk about that I absolutely loved, that I wanted to make sure we touched on, was how people are telling themselves these stories in the moment of what's going to happen. Oh, now I'm going to tell this. They're already like formulating the story in their mind. And when you were telling that, I was like, I talk about that, and I haven't heard anybody else really talk about that. Like I'm always like, this is the story, we're building the story and stuff. So like, yeah, if you would talk on that, I would love that.
Oh, well, I think golfers are maybe the worst at this. And so that's certainly where I think around it, because I can pretty much predict the story I'm going to hear from a player as they're coming off the 18th green based on their body language. You kind of tell they've got a little pep in their step, or they're just dragging off and they're glad it's over with. But the story is, well, I got a bad bounce on 3, and then I lipped out for birdie on 7, and then that pin position was ridiculous on 9, and then I smoked my drive but hit a sprinkler head. And so they're coming up 18 and they're ready to tell their story, because the first question that everyone's going to ask them is, well, how'd you play? Which is code for what'd you shoot? And so they're ready to justify why they shot the number they shot. On the flip side, they might be playing really well. Well, I eagled 1, and then I made a really good up and down on 4 to keep the round going, and then on 8 I stuffed it, knocked that in. And so now they're coming up 16, 17, 18, getting ready to tell all their buddies how great they played. And so they're getting ready to recount that story. And then that's typically the time where they lose focus and then dump it in the drink, make double on 18. And now the story is, wow, I was killing it. And then I finished double or something like that. So there's a lot of time to be an author out on the golf course. And so it's, we're trying to remind our players all the time okay, we're playing this shot and this hole. And at the end of it, we can tally it up. And then let's, again, go back to reflection. Let's review what happened. But it's certainly the creating this story. And sometimes you even hear people write the story before the game starts or before the performance. Well, I was sick this week and I didn't get much sleep, so I don't know how today's going to go. Like they're creating the just in case. If I don't play well, then I've already explained why I didn't play well. It's been a while since I got out to practice. Adults do this, especially. I just, I haven't touched the clubs. There's been too much work. They're setting themselves up to provide an excuse for when they don't hit a good shot instead of just accepting I'm going to hit good shots, I'm going to hit bad shots, I'm going to get good bounces, I'm going to get bad bounces. That's part of the game. So yeah, you don't want to be composing in any stories while you're playing.
Gosh. Okay. So what is your tactic for helping people to stop composing stories while they're playing?
I think the first thing is you have to recognize you're doing it. Let's build some awareness of that. And are we looking at facts, or are we looking at a story, at a judgment that we've created? I mean, you mentioned Trevor Moawad, like getting to neutral. I like to talk about, let's look at objective facts. So one of the exercises I'll do is I have a picture of dots that I'll put up, and most people look at it and I say, what is this? And they say, it's a Dalmatian. Okay. If I connect the dots and outline it, yes, it's in the shape of a dog. But what is it? Well, it's just dots. If we can drill down to it, it's just dots. That's what it is. So let's look at the facts of what's happening instead of creating meaning and judgment around it. So let's look at the practicalities of it. I sucked on the field today. Well, okay, that's a story. You went 1 for 4 and had 2 strikeouts. So that's just a state. This is just what the facts are. And so we're trying to make it as neutral as possible, as objective as possible, and take that evaluation. And so with that tends to come a lot of emotion too. Let's just be a little more coolly rational about what's really happening here. And that takes time. I mean, we have thinking habits just like our other habits, but that's just a question to continually ask, is like, what are we seeing here? And what are the facts of the situation? Let's make this objective and then evaluate from there.
And so now, having coached both golf and basketball, we got like what the terminology is, like open loop versus a closed loop.
Yes.
Kind of a thing, right? So will you talk on that?
I mean, I think golf is the most mental sport because there is so much time that you're incapable of thinking. And you get to hit one shot, and then now you have multiple minutes to think about what just happened and then deal with the consequences of what happened. And there's no substitution. You just have to play it out. You've got to deal with those consequences all the way through. But, in a round of golf, if we're lucky, it's 4.5 hours. In a competitive round, most competitive rounds are longer than that. Out of that time, a good golfer is actually in motion for about 70 seconds.
No.
So what are you doing for the rest of that time?
Wow. That's perspective. Wow.
Now, with basketball, there's less time to stew. There's less time to think about it because it's back and forth. It's up and down. You make a play, you lose the ball, you run back. You just inherently are going to run back on defense, so you don't have as much time to think until you get to the free throw line. And now you get to
Mm.
consider, what are the consequences of this, especially towards the end of the game? What are the results? What are people going to say? How are they going to react, positively or negatively, based on how I perform? And so all of a sudden, you get much more of that golf-like experience at the free throw line than you would in more the free-flowing nature of basketball. So they provide different challenges. Um, and so sometimes I'm trying to get my golfers to play more athletically like a basketball player, and sometimes I'm trying to get basketball kids to think a little more rationally and intentionally like a golfer too. So I've actually found, over the time that I coached, I started adapting drills from both sports in opposite directions. And I mean, that's some of the fun of coaching for me too.
Yeah, it's got to be cool. I know because you are coaching on both sides of the spectrum, like you said, and so I was kind of curious what some of the tools would be. I guess maybe just one or two tools that would be different, perhaps, from basketball than it would be for golf. To give you an example, one of my past interviews, his name's Graham Betchart, and he talked about next play speed because he does mostly basketball. And so it was like how, because the next on to the next play, on to the next play, on to the next play, like, and so with golf, I mean, I'm sure that's part of it is like on to the next, but at the same time,
Right.
like you do have all that time, so it's a little bit different. It's not a speed factor. It's just you know, eventually you'll get over it, and
Yeah,
by the time you do
and
your next shot, hopefully.
it's where you're choosing to focus on. And I think with both sports, but in a different way, it's attentional direction. Uh, so many people think, well, I need to focus the entire time for a round of golf. Well, the human is not capable of focusing for that 4.5, 5 hours of extended deep focus. And so it's a matter of having a very narrow focus when I'm about to hit a shot, and then allowing my focus to broaden after the shot. And so can I be manipulating and directing my focus at appropriate times? Between shots, yes, let's talk about the basketball game. Let's look in the backyards at what kind of backyard kitchen setup they have. Let's talk about the weather, whatever, because we don't need to be focused at that time.
Hmm.
And that helps maintain the mental energy you need to focus then when it really is that time shot. Now, some of that's personality, a difference too. Certainly some golfers are more extroverted. They just like to talk more, and they're going to take that approach and constantly be talking throughout and through a round. And then some others are more introverted and they're quieter and they like to just be a little more in their bubble. Um, and that's fine too. But even so, you've got to find ways to broaden that focus, narrow that focus at the appropriate time. Um, with the speed of basketball, I think can sometimes lead to not thinking, and it can become very reactive because you're back and forth. And I think you have to create a little space in there for some of that thought process to occur. So that means having a routine to use at dead balls, for example. So rather than going up and down the court, up and down the court, up and down the court, not really thinking about how the game is flowing, what's the offense doing, what's the defense, what's their personnel, and understanding what's happening, I think is an important transition to a higher level of play. So you have a stoppage, whether that's a dead ball, a timeout, a free throw, a foul. At any point, you have a moment where you can now let the last play go, quickly review what's been going on, set an intention for the next play, and then reset. And if you can use that, it's a cyclical approach of you play, you release the play, now we review, we reset, and then execute again. And doing that more purposefully, I think, is something that a lot of basketball players don't really tend to do.
Hmm.
So that's one that I think has value on the golf course too, but I think golf lends itself more easily to using that kind of approach as opposed to basketball. And so I want my basketball players to recognize here's what's going on. Here's why they're scoring on us, or here's why we're scoring on them, or here's how the game is being called, or let's recognize what's happening. So in both cases, you're trying to build a lot of awareness, both internal and external awareness, and using your brain to be responsive rather than reactive.
Hmm. And so I'm curious now. This kind of came to my mind, and it wasn't necessarily a part of my questioning, but you've been teaching now for quite a while, being around, both middle school and high school, and the digital age has certainly had a huge impact on attentional direction, as you called it, attentional
Yes.
direction. And so, how have you seen that impact? And yeah, I guess that's all I want to know. How has that impacted from your perspective, knowing what you know about mental performance and everything?
Well, I spend a whole lot more time talking about attention and focus and concentration than I used to. I think we have to train that, but along with that, I spend a lot of time talking about awareness, and the reason I think is because when when I was a kid, there was a lot of time when I was just alone with my thoughts. I'm riding a bike down the road, nothing in my ears. I'm hiking in the woods, or I'm going fishing with my family, or uh, riding in the car, cross country trip, whatever. Like, I wasn't plugged in continually, and so there's a lot of time to be alone with your thoughts and to think about things and just be still, just be quiet, and that doesn't happen anymore because kids, if we allow them, are constantly going to plug in. They're constantly going to have something in their ear. There's something in front of their eyes, and there's not much time where they're alone with their thoughts, except in sport.
Hmm.
So now they've never considered, how am I going to deal with this thought when I have it? Because they have no experience of being present with their thoughts until it pops up. If I miss this, we lose the game. Or
God.
I just screwed up. Or we have a chance to win if we just do X, Y, and Z. And so now how are you going to manage all these thoughts if you've never really sat with them elsewhere and never, or you have this flood of thoughts and you're not comfortable with looking at thoughts? It's a whole lot easier to just plug in or tune out. Um, so I think that's a big difference of, when, I mean, this starts to make me sound old. When I started teaching, kids did not have phones. And, and so when we'd travel, the highlight of the season was the van rides. That was for many of my early girls golf teams. That was the best part of the season, was the time they spent in the van. What happens in the van stays in the van. They had a great time, and it was loud and raucous, and we had some long road trips. And then that shifted over time as kids got better and better phones, and so all of a sudden the van rides got really quiet because everyone's in their own little world and not interacting. So I thought that's a big one, of just trying to train that awareness, and then let's notice where your attention is and what you're doing, because um, the phone is, in particular, is addictive, and that that's in the hands of somebody who's prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, and we know as adults that it can be a distraction. And now you're giving a tool to somebody that's not fully developed and hasn't developed, has the maturity or the experience to handle all this. And so I think that's a really big one is just, let's build some self-awareness. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What experience and emotion are we having right now? Where's that coming from? How does that impact your decisions? That's certainly a big conversation. And then how do we redirect attention when it's constantly shifting? Like, are we training the ability to be focused, or are we training for distraction of constantly shifting our attention back and forth, back and forth? And, right now, culturally, we're training people to be distracted, and we're not good as humans. We're not adults. We know we're not good at this, of constantly shifting attention back and forth. So I think those are two big areas that I just feel like we have to teach more now than we did in the past.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I brought it up as well, because it's huge, and like I said earlier, and you said earlier, it has implications across so many different things, and so it's like very valuable to see, that how it has current world implication because of where we're at in society right now with the digital age being here, and it's a lot. So I'm curious now about the performance blueprint, because I feel like the performance blueprint is going to cure this. Not really, but what I mean? It's going to help people.
Yeah. So I was thinking about performance, and the ironic thing is, I took a lot of education classes to become a teacher, and I had student teaching. Well, in student teaching, they teach you how to teach. I don't know that I ever took a class on student learning. And so I came to this conclusion that schools don't really teach kids how to learn, they teach them what to learn. And along the way, we just kind of figure out, some of us better than others, how to learn.
Yeah.
But what a lot of people use is not the most effective way to learn. So in the process of getting into sports psych and studying motor learning, there's this whole body of literature about learning out there, not just of motor skills, but also of academic skills. Go figure. Why isn't this ever taught to us? And this doesn't come up in professional development days or things like that. So I started thinking about that connection, and so I was like, okay, how does this fit with learning? And I'm weaving in the sports psych at the same time. And then I was just noticing behaviors from kids had changed, that things that you assumed that students would do were no longer happening. Like, I would literally have to say these things out loud. So I distinctly remember the year this happened is, I'm talking about a topic and nobody's taking notes. Nobody's writing anything down. And that's why I said, okay, you need to write this down on paper. And so the kid reaches in their backpack, pulls out an old worksheet, turns it on its side, and starts writing in the margin.
Oh man.
Not a notebook, not even notebook paper, but just the first piece of paper, and then shoves it back in the backpack to compost, never to be seen again. And I was like, there's a lot of things that I'm starting to say that we need to teach that, I just kind of did, or we did as kids. So I put that into really three buckets. So I call it success behaviors. These are just the things that good students, good employees do. You show up. You follow directions. You know how to win the game. You know how to score. Just understanding how the world works and basic things that you have to do. So those are success behaviors. And then you've got the learning strategies. So how do we effectively learn material, and really emphasis on learning, not just trying to rote memorize it. And so there's a bucket of those strategies that I like to teach. And then the third category, and this is probably more branding than it's performance assets is the name I use for it. But it's essentially sports psychology principles. And I had to come up with that name because in the literature, you sometimes see it called social emotional learning, so SEL, or sometimes you see
emotional intelligence,
emotional intelligence, EQ. The worst name that I saw was non-cognitive factors. But that's the most commonly used term in literature. I'm like, that is an awful term. First off, it is cognitive, and what kind of factors? So I got to thinking about it. I was like, okay, I think people need all three of these things, and then I think of it as a triangle. And my basketball background, I'm thinking triangle offense. The Tex Winter offense that he brought to the Chicago Bulls, which is why the Bulls became so successful with Michael Jordan. I mean, Jordan did not win a championship until Tex Winter shows up, Phil Jackson shows up, and they start running the triangle offense. So you have this interaction of the performance asset, the learning strategy, and the success behavior all together. So let's use math as an example. If my mindset is I'm not good at math. Okay, so you have some negative self-talk there. You have a lack of confidence there. Because I don't believe I'm good at math, I'm not going to use the learning strategy or the method that the teacher teaches me, because why would I try that? I'm not good at math. So I ignore the learning strategies that are a possibility. And then consequently, I don't do the things that would help me be successful, those basic behaviors of ask questions, listen, follow directions, because what's the point? It's not going to change my outlook. And so we get a negative interaction of those three, versus I come in and say, math is difficult, but I can do difficult things. So now we have a growth mindset with some positive self-talk. So there's your performance assets. So I'm going to listen to this strategy about how to study and use the approach to problem solving that's being taught to me. So that's my learning strategy. And I'm going to ask more questions, be more involved, and come after school and ask for extra help. So those are my success behaviors. And now I perform better, which builds my confidence. And now I get that positive feedback too. So I think of it as a triangular approach of interaction between those three categories. And I call it a blueprint because nobody teaches these things. Like, nobody teaches you how to be a good student. Nobody teaches you how to learn effectively in most cases. And when I ask kids, like, well, how did you learn to learn? And they're like, I don't know. Like, they just kind of figure things out. As humans, I mean, we do learn on our own, but we can learn more effectively, more quickly if we know strategies that actually have some research background and support for them. And then, like I said, some of the behaviors that we used to have, just culturally, we don't have anymore. So we've got to teach those behaviors too.
That actually reminded me of a lot of Tony Robbins' example he gives. So it was really good. You're a triangle. Let's say them one more time. So success behaviors, learning strategies, and performance assets, all working hand in hand and all affecting each other as well. And so Tony Robbins talks about, I wish I could remember all four of them right now, but it's a 4 quadrants. I don't know if you know this or not, but it's a 4 quadrant square, and it is potential, action, results, and behaviors. Oh, it is. I did remember all 4. Nice. And so it turns out that, like, if you believe you have a small potential, then you take small actions, and then you get small results, and then your behaviors reinforce doing more small things. And so he's like massive action,
Hmm.
equals, so that's kind of how he talks about it, but they all affect each other because from the belief level. And that's actually entirely how I got into this as well. Cause I used to be a personal trainer, and then I was noticing like people know these things, and I could even give them the exact blueprint, literally the blueprint, like down to the macro, down to the perfect for their body type and everything. And then they're still struggling. Like, I don't know what's wrong with me. And it's like, or I'm feeling like I'm not doing a good enough job, when in reality there's just so much of this mental stuff going on, some of these beliefs underneath the surface,
Right.
preventing them from, because I'm like, why can't you just Google it first of all? Google like how to get healthier, how to eat right, how to,
Yeah.
like, the same thing I did, but I employed those learning strategies from a certain place of mind, because I cared and because I was dealing with my own mental things. And so yeah, I really loved the performance blueprint. That was perfect. So I'm curious now. We'll kind of wrap this up here, but first of all, I always ask, is there anything else you feel like we didn't really kind of touch on that's like, I usually talk about this and I want to make sure I get a chance to say this?
I think we pretty much covered it.
I think we did
Uh,
really good. I think we did really good.
yeah.
So where can our guests find you if they're interested to know more about you, if they're interested in the Las Vegas Mental Performance Summit, they want to come because they're a coach or they're a personal trainer, mental performance, sports psych, just someone interested in that stuff. Where can they find you?
Sure. All my social media and my website, all the same thing, Coach Mark Cheney. So www.coachmarkcheney.com or at Coach Mark Cheney. Those would all get you to that. Email me, mark@coachmarkcheney.com. That will get you information. You can go directly through Eventbrite if you wanted to register for the summit. Summit's coming up the end of February, so February 27th and 28th. And early registration ends in a week, so get yourself a
Do
discount.
1 week. Man, get in there. Yeah, get in there. So you also have a podcast. Can you plug your podcast real quick and your newsletter?
I'll plug the podcast. Let's call it dormant at best.
Hey,
That
that's
was
where I've
kind of
been
a
there too.
COVID project. Haven't spent a lot of time on it recently, just because I've found other projects of providing more ROI right now. But I call it the Ripple Tank. That's
Love
a
it.
physics reference. If you listen to the first episode, you'll find out why. But it is the Ripple Tank, and the content that I created on that, it is evergreen. I still send it out to all my students now. So certainly going to have some success behaviors and learning strategies and performance assets in there. And then my newsletter is the 90%. And that one, go to my website. It's free. Just hit the sign up button on the pop-up, and you'll get that a couple times a month.
And why is it called the 90%? I'd love to hear that real quick.
Because I asked my coaching staff what I should call my newsletter, and one of my coaches suggested the 90%. Happened to be a baseball coach. Yogi Berra once upon a time said baseball is 90% mental and the other half is physical. So you've got that long you've got that long history of baseball using that term, and then I just kept finding more and more people using that 90% term. So I'll ask groups all the time, what percentage of your game is mental? And overwhelmingly, they say 90%. And then I'll ask, how much time do you spend working on your mental game? And usually the answer is like 10%. So I said, well, maybe we should work on that 90%. So I start every edition of the newsletter with a new 90% quote, and it's amazing how many people use that number. So some might call it cliche, but that's why I go with the 90%.
I love it. That's perfect. Well, thank you, Mark, for being here. Thank you, viewers, for watching. Hope you got some gems from this. And until next time.
Thanks a lot, Todd.